I discovered my wife was at a singles party with her friends. It was an ordinary night, nothing unusual. I'd just finished work and, by chance, drove past the bar hosting the event. I rarely frequented such places, but something drew me in that evening. The thumping music drowned out conversations, neon lights flickered, and the air reeked of alcohol and perfume. I took a seat at the bar, ordered a beer, and scanned the room. Amid the chaos, my gaze locked onto a familiar figure. She was laughing, surrounded by friends, clearly enjoying herself. But this wasn't just anyone, it was her. The woman I'd built a life with, shared dreams and vows. My wife. A wave of shock crashed over me. She betrayed me. It wasn't just the party or the carefree atmosphere. It was how she carried herself, as if nothing else mattered. She didn't notice me at first, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Time seemed to slow as anger and disbelief churned within me. What was she doing here? Did I even know the woman I married? My heart pounded, and the beer in my hand felt heavier by the second. Part of me wanted to leave, to pretend I'd never seen her there. But something held me in place. Then our eyes met. Her smile vanished, replaced by silent panic. She stood motionless, caught in the act. No words were needed, our locked gazes said it all. What would happen next? The truth was painful enough, but I sensed something darker lurking beneath the surface. For months, I'd felt something was off. Those hushed phone calls she claimed were work-related, the late nights out with friends that always seemed too convenient. Now here she was, caught in a world I never imagined she'd be part of. When she finally approached me, hesitant and unsure, I realized this wasn't just about betrayal. There was a chasm between us, one she'd been digging for a long time and I'd been blind not to see it. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. I can explain, she finally murmured, scrambling for an excuse, any excuse to soften the blow. But nothing she said could change what I already knew or what I was about to uncover. The past few months replayed in my mind like a film, every hurried word, every gesture I'd naively trusted. That gnawing feeling in my gut, I'd tried to ignore it, all made sense now. She cheated. But what else was she hiding? I took a deep breath. The pain of betrayal cut deep, twisting like a knife in my chest. Yet somehow, I knew this wasn't the worst of it. She had more to say, something I dreaded hearing. Her silence was already a confession of something bigger than just a party or a night out. This was about choices made in secret, decisions that would change everything forever. She looked at me with wide eyes, pleading for understanding. But how could anyone forgive the unforgivable? In an instant, all our promises crumbled into dust. One question burned in my mind, asterisk, how far does this go? What else are you hiding, asterisk? Behind her, oblivious friends laughed and toasted as if nothing could touch their carefree night. But we were trapped in our own world, a world where the air felt heavy and every second stretched into an eternity. She stood there desperate, I stood on the edge of a decision. Still, I couldn't walk away. Something bigger was coming, something that would change everything in that silent moment between us. The consequences were inevitable. Whatever she was about to reveal, I wasn't ready for it. I thought I knew pain's limits, but that night taught me otherwise. Betrayal has layers deep, endless layers, and this was only the beginning. Finally, she gathered her courage and spoke words I never thought I'd hear. Maybe we can have an open marriage. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. In that stuffy bar, surrounded by music and distant laughter, our marriage crumbled before my eyes. But there was more, much more she hadn't said yet. All I could do now was listen with my heart closed and my mind braced for the worst. Later that morning, John sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint light filtering through thin curtains. Silence filled the room as he listened to Amanda's footsteps downstairs. They'd been together for over 10 years, since college, a time when love felt simple and unshakable. Back then, they stayed up late talking for hours and made promises sealed with passionate kisses. But life had changed since then, slowly at first, until routine crept in unnoticed, until now when he couldn't ignore it anymore. Something had shifted between them long before tonight, and he wasn't sure if they could ever get it back again. The love between them seemed to have faded, not from a lack of affection but perhaps from the weight of familiarity and responsibilities they both carried. John sighed, reflecting on how distant the last few months had become, marked by silences where laughter and confidences once flowed. Amanda had grown adept at masking her feelings. She knew something was wrong, she could feel it deep in her chest though she couldn't pinpoint when it had started. John had always been a good husband, hardworking, dependable, always concerned about her and their future together. But over time, monotony set in, repetitive days blending into one another until they began to suffocate her spirit. At first Amanda told herself it was just a phase every couple goes through, but as months turned into years, doubts crept deeper into her mind. Seeking distractions became second nature. Nights out with friends, new hobbies, even short work trips accepted more frequently than before. John noticed her absences, but preoccupied with his own work never pressed for answers. Perhaps deep down he didn't want to know. Their home, once filled with warmth and shared dreams, now felt hollow. The modern decor they had chosen together held memories of happier times. The large sofa where they'd spent countless afternoons laughing at comedies now sat empty. The dinner table where they'd once discussed their future rarely hosted meaningful conversations anymore. Even their bedroom, once a sanctuary of passion, had become little more than a place for rest. John remained steadfast in his role as a devoted husband, clinging to the belief that their love could be rekindled. He still looked at her with admiration, remembering the woman he had fallen for and whom he still loved deeply. Amanda, however, maintained a facade of normalcy. She knew how hard John worked to keep their life together, and part of her felt guilty for no longer sharing his intensity of feeling. But for her, the routine had smothered the romance that once made her feel alive. Over time, she began seeking solace outside their home, moments where she could simply be Amanda, free from the weight of marriage and expectations. John's demanding job at a growing tech company consumed more of his time. Late-night meetings left him exhausted, with little energy left for conversation at home. He sensed the growing distance between them but told himself it was temporary. On vacation, he thought, when it's just the two of us again, everything will go back to normal. Meanwhile, Amanda began spending more time with friends, those without children or complicated lives. Outings became frequent, justified as a way to relax and disconnect. In those moments, surrounded by carefree conversations, she felt a freedom she hadn't known in years. John noticed but chose to believe it was just a phase. He tried to bridge the gap with small gestures, making her breakfast before work, sending thoughtful messages during the day, but Amanda responded with tense smiles and mechanical replies. They seemed to orbit the same house but rarely connected. Their conversations grew superficial. John would ask about her day, Amanda would answer briefly before steering towards safer topics. Their nights together were calm but empty, filled with a silence that would have been unbearable months ago. In John's mind, this was temporary. He believed their love was strong enough to weather any storm. He'd seen marriages endure worse and was convinced theirs would too. It was only a matter of time before things returned to normal. But for Amanda, their marriage felt irrevocably changed. Though she still loved John, she wasn't sure that love was enough to sustain them as they were. The emotional toll weighed heavily on her. She began to crave the moments away from home where she could shed the expectations of being the perfect wife and simply exist as herself. One night, after an outing with friends, Amanda returned home to find John on the couch reading a work report. He looked up with a tired smile and asked how her evening had been. "Good," she replied casually. The girls looked great. As she headed upstairs to bed, already thinking about her next escape, John turned back to his report. Deep down, he knew something was breaking between them. He could feel it, but he refused to admit it. He clung to the hope that their love would overcome any obstacle. Yet every mechanical gesture from Amanda, every forced smile, every night spent apart left an invisible scar on him. Still, he held on to the belief that things could get better, that they had to get better. John had always believed the love he felt was strong enough for both of them. But the cracks in their relationship continued to deepen, the distance between them growing larger with each passing day. Amanda, on the other hand, felt increasingly disconnected from the life she had once imagined would last forever. The silent tension between them built to a point where it became impossible to ignore. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier, mornings turned into silent standoffs, and dinners, when they happened, were filled with shallow conversations and averted glances. Amanda continued her routine of going out with friends while John buried himself in work, trying to find solace in the small things that still connected them. Deep down, he knew he was clinging to fragments of what their relationship once was, unable to let go of the hope that it could still be repaired. One night, as Amanda prepared for yet another outing, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had fallen in love with John. There was a coldness in her eyes, a distance she couldn't hide even from herself. She knew the situation couldn't continue much longer but lacked the courage to face the truth. Part of her still wanted to believe that her actions were an attempt to rediscover herself. Something inside screamed that she was wrong, that her choices were pushing everything toward a breaking point. John watched her get ready as he did every night before she left. He said nothing. Confronting her about her absences had only created more barriers between them. But tonight felt different. Amanda seemed more distant than usual, her forced smile as she said goodbye carried a weight he couldn't ignore. She mumbled something about being back late and left, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. Alone at home, John decided he needed to clear his mind. He grabbed his car keys and drove aimlessly through the city. The night was cold, the wind whistled through the open windows as the hum of the engine filled the silence. The streets were nearly deserted. His thoughts drifted back over the last few months as he searched for the exact moment when everything had started to unravel. The change had been so gradual, so quiet that it had gone unnoticed until it was too late. As he drove, an uneasy feeling settled in his chest. Part of him urged him to stop avoiding the truth. Something was off. It wasn't just Amanda's late nights or her vague excuses. He didn't want to be the kind of man who doubted his wife, but the pieces no longer added up. The suspicion gnawed at him, no matter how hard he tried to push it aside. Finally, John did something he never thought he would. He followed her. He didn't know what he expected to find, but he needed answers. He drove to the bar where Amanda and her friends usually met, parking across the street where he could watch unnoticed. The bar buzzed with life, loud music spilling into the night as groups of people laughed and chatted outside. Inside, Amanda sat with her friends, laughing as usual, but something felt different tonight. A man John didn't recognize approached her with an ease that made his stomach twist. Tall and confident, with an easy smile and relaxed posture, he seemed entirely at home among Amanda's friends. They laughed and talked as if his presence were completely natural. John's breath hitched as he watched from a distance. The man placed a hand on Amanda's shoulder, a casual gesture that carried an intimacy suggesting this wasn't their first encounter. Amanda didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled back at him as if it were exactly what she wanted. A chill ran down John's spine. His heart raced, cold sweat trickling down his forehead despite the cool night air. He couldn't look away. Every gesture, her laugh, the way she tilted her head to listen seemed to confirm what he had feared for months. This wasn't just a night out with friends. His stomach dropped as if all the air had been sucked out of his lungs. Part of him wanted to storm into the bar and demand an explanation. Another part felt paralyzed, his body frozen in place as if trapped in that moment. Then Amanda stood up from the table and walked toward the exit with the man trailing behind her. John's legs trembled as he realized where they were headed. Amanda glanced around as if checking for familiar faces before they climbed into a car parked nearby and shut the doors behind them. John's blood boiled as his chest tightened. Inside that car, silence screamed louder than any words ever could. The confirmation he had dreaded was now laid bare before him. Amanda was betraying their trust, their love, everything they had built together. The pain hit him like a tidal wave, an emptiness that gnawed at him from within, a wound so deep he knew it wouldn't heal easily. He sat motionless in his car, staring at the streetlights reflecting off the other vehicle's windows. The image of Amanda smiling at another man burned into his mind like a flame that refused to be extinguished. John didn't know how to process what he had just witnessed. He wasn't the type to explode in anger or confront with aggression, but despair consumed him now. The betrayal cut deeper than anything he had ever felt before, a raw ache that left him hollow and lost in its wake. There were no more doubts, no more excuses. All that remained was the certainty that his marriage was crumbling. The clock on the car's dashboard seemed frozen, just like John. He couldn't move. He couldn't leave. The cold night air contrasted sharply with the heat of his suppressed anger. As time dragged on, he knew he was about to make a decision that would change everything. John sat in silence, watching the car where Amanda sat with another man. The world around him seemed to disintegrate in slow motion, and he felt trapped in a bubble of distorted reality. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, disbelief, and unbearable pain. It was hard to breathe. Every heartbeat felt like an explosion in his chest. He didn't move, just sat there, watching while his mind struggled to process what his eyes had already confirmed. Amanda had betrayed him not just that night, but likely for far longer than he realized. Why hadn't he noticed before? How could he have been so blind? The clock on the dashboard read midnight. He didn't know how long it had been since she'd gotten into that car, but it felt like an eternity. The pain of seeing her with another man was overwhelming. Part of him wanted to storm over, yank open the car door, and demand answers, scream, question, confront. But another part of him, the part that was most hurt and broken, just wanted to escape. He knew the truth wouldn't change what he already knew, but somehow, facing it felt necessary. After what felt like hours, the other car's lights flicked on. Amanda and the man left, and John watched as she said a quick goodbye, no lingering embrace, no ceremony. She got into her own car as naturally as she had entered his life so many years ago and drove off toward home. John followed from a distance, keeping far enough back to avoid being noticed. When he arrived home, he waited a few minutes before going inside. He needed time to compose himself, to steady the turmoil raging within him. By the time he walked through the door, Amanda was already in their bedroom. The soft sound of the shower running suggested she was trying to wash away whatever guilt might be consuming her. He sat on the edge of the bed, his face buried in his hands, trying to figure out what to do next. But the truth was, he didn't know how to react. There was no right way to deal with this kind of betrayal, no manual for the kind of pain he was feeling. A few minutes later, Amanda emerged from the bathroom wearing a silk robe. When she saw him sitting there, her gaze froze for a moment before she forced a tight smile. "Hey," she said casually, as if nothing had happened. "You're home early today." John stared at her in silence for several seconds. Every word he wanted to say caught in his throat, choked by the emotions suffocating him. He didn't know where to start, but he knew he had to speak. "Amanda," he finally said, his voice low and strained, "we need to talk." She blinked, her expression flickering with unease as the tension thickened between them. "Sure," she replied cautiously. "About what?" John took a deep breath, struggling to stay calm despite the storm raging inside him. "I know what's going on," he said slowly, each word heavy with pain. "I know you betrayed me." Amanda's eyes widened briefly before her face paled. She opened her mouth as if to respond but hesitated, then sighed and sat down beside him on the bed. "John," she began softly, "I can explain." "Explain what?" His voice sharpened as anger cut through his pain. "You betrayed me, Amanda. I saw you tonight. I followed you. I saw you with him." The silence that followed was suffocating. Amanda looked down at her hands, her eyes welling with tears, but no words came. It was as if she knew nothing she said could change what he already knew. She had been caught red-handed. I didn't want it to be like this," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. I felt so lost these past few months, so suffocated." She paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. "I thought, maybe if I found something outside of here, something different, it would help me find what I lost inside." John let out a bitter laugh, devoid of humor or warmth. "And you thought cheating on me on the man who loves you was going to solve everything?" Amanda finally met his gaze for the first time since their conversation began. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks, but they brought no comfort or relief to either of them. Both were drowning under waves of emotion crashing relentlessly against them until neither could see clearly anymore through the storm of pain and betrayal. "John," Amanda began, her voice trembling, "I really think this could work. We can still be together, just in a different way. I don't want to lose you." "You've already lost me," he said, standing up from the bed and looking down at her. Every word felt like a crushing weight. "Do you think this absurd solution will fix what you did? That seeing me with someone else every now and then will erase the pain I'm feeling right now?" Amanda lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. But to John, those tears meant nothing anymore. He knew what was between them was beyond repair. Her suggestion was the final nail in the coffin of any hope he might have clung to. Yet, there was something more, something Amanda wasn't saying. John could sense it. Her proposal wasn't just born of desperation, there was a deeper secret she was still hiding. The The thought of an unrevealed truth tormented him as he left the room, leaving Amanda in tears. Every step he took seemed to increase the weight pressing on his chest. At the same time, something inside him screamed that this wasn't the end, that there was more to come. John slammed the bedroom door shut, his hands trembling with rage. He descended the stairs, each step heavy as if the floor might give way beneath him. Amanda's words echoed in his mind, her absurd suggestion to open their marriage, as though it could erase the damage she'd done. The house was eerily silent, the air stifling and thick. He stumbled into the living room and collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Emotionally drained, he knew this wasn't over. What haunted him most wasn't just the betrayal, it was the sinking feeling that there was more to uncover. The infidelity, as devastating as it was, felt like only the beginning. Something darker loomed beneath the surface. Minutes later, light footsteps descended the stairs. Amanda appeared in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen. She hesitated, watching him from a distance, unsure whether to approach or give him space. But John knew he couldn't walk away, not until he had the full truth, no matter how much it shattered him. "John," she began, her voice trembling, "I know suggesting an open marriage was insane. I was desperate, I didn't know how to fix what I'd broken. But that doesn't excuse what I did. I betrayed you." She paused, swallowing hard. "And there's more you need to hear." John looked up, his gaze locking onto hers. He braced himself, driven by a grim determination to uncover what had been hidden. Amanda took a few tentative steps forward and sat in the armchair across from him. She drew a shaky breath, as if steeling herself for a confession that had been festering for far too long. "It wasn't just once, John," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I cheated on you, multiple times." The words struck him like a blow to the gut. The ground seemed to vanish beneath him. He had suspected there was more, but nothing could have prepared him for this. For a moment, he was paralyzed, unable to speak or even breathe. "I didn't plan it, I swear," Amanda continued, tears streaming down her face. "It started small, harmless flirting that made me feel alive again, different. I don't know when it crossed the line, but by the time I realized it, I was already in too deep." John shook his head as if trying to dislodge her words, but they reverberated in his mind relentlessly. He stood abruptly and began pacing, running his hands through his hair as he struggled to process what he'd just heard. A hollow ache spread through his chest, a betrayal so profound it felt like drowning. "How many times?" His voice cracked with suppressed fury. "With how many?" She lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. "I don't know, more than once, with 2 people." Her voice broke as she added, "I didn't want it to be like this, John. I was confused, feeling trapped. None of this is an excuse, I know that, but I didn't know how to handle what was happening inside me." John's anger boiled over. He wanted to scream, to smash something, anything to release the pain tearing through him. "And you thought opening our marriage would fix this?" he demanded incredulously. "Did you really think more betrayal could undo what you destroyed?" Amanda sobbed harder now, her words fragmented between gasps. "I didn't know what to do. I got lost. I thought maybe, if we had more freedom, I could somehow make up for what I did. I was trying not to lose you." John stopped pacing and fixed her with a glare that burned with pain and rage. "You already lost me," he said coldly. "The moment you chose to betray my trust, the trust one gave you freely, you destroyed everything we had. This isn't about freedom, it's about respect, something you clearly no longer have for me or for us." She stood abruptly and reached for his hands as if seeking absolution. "Please, John. I know I was wrong, but I still love you. I want to fix this. I'd do anything." He jerked away sharply. "Fix? Amanda, you obliterated everything. And you knew exactly what you were doing every time you went behind my back. Now you expect me to just forgive and forget?" Amanda crumpled into herself, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her body. John stood frozen, his chest aching with a pain so intense it threatened to consume him entirely. But there was more, he could feel it. A gnawing suspicion that something far worse lay beneath the surface of her confession. "Who are they?" he demanded, his voice low and cutting. "Who did you cheat on me with?" She hesitated, panic flickering in her eyes before she looked away. "Does it matter?" she whispered. John clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. "Of course it matters. I deserve to know who helped you destroy us. Amanda drew a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. One of them, you don't know him. A coworker, someone I got involved with while traveling. John remained silent, bracing himself for what he knew was coming next. And the other? Her voice faltered, barely audible now. The other is someone you know, someone close to us. A chill ran down John's spine, his heart pounding like a drum. Who, Amanda? Who is it? She hesitated, her hands clutching the arm of the couch as if it were her only anchor. Finally, she met his gaze, her eyes red and swollen. It's Mike, she whispered. Your best friend. The name struck John like a thunderclap. Mike, the man he'd known since childhood, the one who'd been there through every high and low. The friend he'd trusted with his life, now the one who'd shattered it. The floor seemed to drop away beneath him. Amanda's betrayal had already felt like a knife to the gut, but this was a betrayal of a different kind. It wasn't just his wife, it was the person he'd considered a brother. Rage surged through him, hot and unrelenting, but there was nowhere for it to go. It coiled inside him, a venomous snake waiting to strike. Amanda took a step back, her face pale with fear, but John stood frozen, his eyes locked on hers in disbelief. What were you thinking? His voice cracked like brittle ice, sharp and biting. How could you do this to me? Amanda shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know, John. I don't know. It was a mistake, a series of mistakes. Mike, he was just there when I was vulnerable. I didn't mean for this to happen. Her words felt hollow, meaningless against the weight of what she'd done. And Mike, his closest friend, was part of it. The betrayal cut deeper than John could have imagined. He took a step back, the room closing in around him. Every memory, every moment he'd shared with Amanda and Mike now felt tainted, poisoned by their actions. He needed airspace, anything to escape the suffocating reality. Without a word, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Amanda standing in silence. The cold night air struck John like a slap as he stumbled into the darkness, his mind spinning. The empty streets amplified the storm raging inside him. He stopped at the edge of a park, the same park where he and Mike had spent countless nights dreaming about their futures. Now, those memories tasted like ash in his mouth. John sank onto a bench, the cold metal biting into his legs as his thoughts spiraled. How could Mike do this? How could Amanda cross that line? The questions burned, each more painful than the last. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and scrolled to Mike's name. His finger hovered over the call button as anger and despair warred within him. Should he confront Mike now? Wait? Or just walk away forever? Before he could second-guess himself, he pressed dial. The phone rang 3 times before Mike answered, his voice casual and carefree. Hey man. What's up? John clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on the phone. For a moment, he couldn't speak, his breath shallow and uneven. I know, he finally said, his voice low and trembling with fury. I know about you and Amanda. The line went silent. John. Man. I can explain, Mike stammered after what felt like an eternity. Explain? John snapped, his voice rising. What could you possibly say to justify this? You were my friend, Mike. My brother. Mike hesitated before replying weakly, it wasn't planned. I swear. I never wanted things to go this far. I don't even know how it happened. John let out a bitter laugh that cut through Mike's excuses like a blade. A mistake, he spat back incredulously before hanging up abruptly. There was nothing else worth saying after such betrayal. He sat there, the weight of Mike's words pressing down on him. The pain still burned, but now there was something more, an emptiness, a realization that no amount of regret could undo what had been done. Their friendship was dead, as was his marriage to Amanda. The night's silence pressed in on him as he sat on the bench, grappling with an impossible choice: confront Amanda again, cut ties with Mike completely, or disappear and start over. Each option felt unbearable, but he knew whatever he decided would alter his life forever. He stood, inhaling the crisp night air, and began the walk home. His steps were heavy, each one echoing the weariness in his soul. The house loomed ahead, its silence thick and suffocating. Inside, Amanda sat on the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap. Her eyes were red and swollen, she hadn't moved since he'd stormed out earlier. She looked diminished, a shadow of the woman he once loved. John paused at the doorway, watching her. The anger that had burned in him earlier had faded, leaving behind a hollow numbness. He stepped inside and sat in the armchair across from her. Neither spoke for a long moment. The silence between them was heavier than any argument they'd ever had. "I called Mike," John finally said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Amanda nodded slowly, as if she'd expected it. "I don't know what to make of what he said," John continued, "just like I don't know what to do with what you did. But Amanda, there is no more us." His words were calm but final. Tears streamed down Amanda's face, silent and unrelenting. She wanted to beg for forgiveness again but knew it was pointless. John's tone and the emptiness in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. "I'm leaving," John said as he stood, the weight of his decision pressing on his chest. "I'm going to leave you with the choices you've made. There's nothing more I can do here. Our marriage is over." Amanda sobbed into her hands, her cries muffled but raw. John didn't falter. He knew this was the only way forward for both of them. The love they'd shared was gone, destroyed not just by betrayal but by broken trust and shattered promises. "John," she managed between sobs, her voice cracking, "please forgive me. I know I did everything wrong, but I still love you. I still want to fix this." He looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. There was something heartbreaking about her plea, but it didn't change anything. "Some things can't be fixed," John said quietly as he turned toward the door. Amanda sat alone, watching him leave the home they'd built together, knowing he would never return. The sound of the door closing echoed through the empty house as her world crumbled around her. John stepped into the cold night air, inhaling deeply before walking to his car. This would be the last time he saw the house where so many memories had been made, the life he knew was over. Weeks passed as John distanced himself from Amanda, Mike, and their shared past. He took time to heal, slowly piecing himself back together after the devastation of those dark days. There was no room left for Mike in John's life. The betrayal was unforgivable, and trust between them was irreparably broken. Amanda faced the consequences of her choices as well. She lost not only her husband but also her circle of friends when word of the affair spread. When John confronted Mike, their relationship ended abruptly, leaving both consumed by shame and regret. John began to rebuild his life far from the world he once knew. He decided to travel, seeking new paths and leaving the past behind. He understood that the pain of betrayal would linger, but he held on to hope that life would eventually make sense again. The scar would remain, but he would grow stronger from it. For Amanda, there was no happy ending. Guilt and regret became her constant companions as she lived a life overshadowed by remorse. Mike faced isolation too, without John's friendship and with a tarnished reputation among their mutual friends. Both paid a heavy price for their choices. John found peace in his fresh start. He learned that despite betrayal and pain, life moves forward. Over time, he discovered that starting over was often the best way to leave the past behind and step into a brighter future. What did you think of this story? If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take a moment to do so now. See you in the next story.